Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating essay by Dan Weber. And honestly, it promises nothing less than a total paradigm shift in how we understand our own consciousness. We're going to completely rethink the everyday metaphors that shape our minds, focusing specifically on the motion behind spatial perception. By the end of this, I promise you're going to look at the way you move through the physical world in an entirely new, deeply connected way. Okay, let's dive into this. When we hear the word metaphor, we usually think of, poetry, literature, or just flowery language. But linguists Lockoff and Johnson propose something radically different. They argue that our entire conceptual system, literally the engine of our thoughts and actions, is fundamentally metaphorical in nature. Metaphors aren't just for art. They're the absolute foundation of how our brains process reality. They're the cognitive tools we use to make sense of the unknown by comparing it to things we already know. And these metaphors are so deeply embedded in our language that we rarely even notice them. Think about it. When you finally understand a difficult concept, what do you say? You say you're grasping a new idea. You're using a physical action of the hand to describe a mental event, almost as if you're trying to physically catch a slippery bar of soap in your mind. Or think about time passing, as if time is a physical object moving right past us on a road. Weber points out that drawing these analogies might be the most basic form of human cognition. Because they're so commonplace, we completely miss them, yet they profoundly influence how we view reality and the very nature of our existence. But our minds easily fall into a trap here. Consider philosopher Colin Wilson's analogy of an artist painting a giant canvas. If the artist stands way too close, well, he can apply the paint, sure, but he can't see the overall composition. But if he stands too far back to see the whole picture, he can't actually reach the canvas to use his paintbrush. Our consciousness constantly wrestles with this exact same dilemma. We get stuck in one perspective, entirely unable to bridge the gap between our immediate actions and our broader awareness. To really understand self-mastery, thinkers have often used the metaphor of riding a horse. The rider's sense of balance maps perfectly to our own self-awareness, while the physical act of controlling that massive, powerful animal beneath you is pretty much analogous to wrestling with your own psychological impulses. Riding a horse conveys the raw, unpredictable power of nature. But Weber actually takes this a step further. He uses this idea to transition us into an even more dynamic natural force to describe the human mind. He talks about the raw, fluid power of riding a wave. Before we hit the surf, though, we kind of have to establish the baseline of traditional Western philosophy. Most of our modern understanding of the mind is built right on top of Plato's famous allegory of the cave. We all know the setup. Prisoners, chained tightly inside a dark, underground den, only able to watch shadows cast on a wall by a fire behind them. They think those fleeting shadows are reality, totally oblivious to the brilliant, blazing sun outside the cave. For thousands of years, this single allegory has absolutely cemented light as the ultimate, unquestioned metaphor for human consciousness and enlightenment. And this brilliantly illustrates how the elements of Plato's cave map onto this new surfing analogy, but with a massive twist. Where Plato uses light, Weber uses motion. Those shadows dancing on the cave wall, they're like the tiny wakes of surfboards on a flat, calm lake. The artificial fire inside the cave is like the sheer physical effort surfers exert on flat water without the momentum of an actual wave. It's just a parody of the real thing. And the illuminating sun outside the cave, that's the equivalent of a surf break exposed to massive, deep ocean swells. We're shifting the ultimate measure of reality away from static light and straight into dynamic motion. So, what does this all mean? Why is this shift even necessary? Well, what's the actual cost of relying on the light metaphor? Well, light is great for rational, heavy abstraction. It comes at a steep price to the individual. When light illuminates a room, it implies the empty space is just sitting there waiting for you. It makes us mistakenly view ourselves as isolated spatial entities. We feel like little action figures just dropped into an empty shoebox. And this creates a false, deeply alienating sense of separation from the physical world around us. So let's build out this new model of the mind. In Weber's surfing metaphor, first you have the wave itself. This represents the constant fluid flow of spatio-temporal relations, basically time and space moving together. Beneath that is the reef, representing the hard underlying reality that shapes the wave. And right in the middle, the surfboard. The surfboard is the vital link between our reason and our perception. Just as a surfboard has to rapidly respond to the breaking wave, which in turn is responding to the hidden reef, our reason has to constantly adjust and respond to our immediate perception of reality. Now, this entire framework is drawn from an incredibly fascinating branch of philosophy called phenomenology. Unlike traditional Western thought that loves to keep things highly abstract and up in the clouds, phenomenology brings everything right back down to earth and right back into your physical body. It totally deviates from the norm by intensely examining everyday lived experience. It insists that consciousness isn't just a brain floating in a jar somewhere. It is intimately, intensely connected to the physical body actively moving through the environment. And this brings us to a really profound, paradigm-shifting question. It makes you wonder, in the architecture of your own mind, which actually comes first, space or motion? The answer lies in a concept called optic flow. This is the visual motion you perceive as you physically move through the world. Think about driving down a highway or walking through a really dense forest. The way objects rush past your field of vision tells your brain how far away they are and where you are in relation to them. Optic flow proves that we absolutely must actively engage in motion in order to reveal space. Space isn't some empty box we just happen to look at. The motion behind spatial perception is what actively unfolds and reveals that dimension to us through our very own physical movement. And that leads us to the powerful conclusion of Weber's analysis. Motion has ontological priority over space. To put it simply, motion fundamentally exists first. You aren't just dropped into an empty void. Your physical movement is the literal engine that constructs the spatial world around you. Your movement brings the spatial world into conscious awareness. We are fundamentally connected to our environment through our actions. So, we've moved from the static, abstract light of Plato's cave into the dynamic, fluid motion of a breaking wave. By recognizing that motion creates our perception of space, we can finally stop feeling so separated from our environment. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to take with you today. Now that you know your mind responds to reality exactly like a surfboard responding to a wave, how does a fluid foundation of consciousness change the way you move through your daily life? Thank you so much for exploring this with me on The Explainer. Catch you next time.